Hello and welcome to MC Webinars. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited with having Richard Hewitt with us today, who is the Director of HE from MC, who's going to be talking around the topic of degree apprenticeships. If you have any questions, please put them in the control panel question box and we'll endeavour to get back to those at the end of the presentation. If not, we will follow up afterwards. You will receive a recording and also the slides of this presentation afterwards. So keep your eye out for the follow-up email. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Richard. Hi.
Hello, Debbie, and thanks very much for setting it up. And sorry to keep you waiting a couple of minutes, just a few technical problems on our side, but great to see so many of you with us, and it's nice to see a good representation from across the country as well. And today I will be talking about how you can use labour market data to help you in your assessment of your regional economy for the potential for particular apprenticeship standards. I'll cover the process and the data that you'll want to consider. Hopefully this will be useful for those of you who already use our Labour Market Insight Research Tool Analyst, as I know many of you are already using it, but also I hope it be useful for those of you who aren't currently, but perhaps will be soon. So we move to the next slide, please, Debbie. So, and you can click once more, there we go. So MZ is just as an introduction, MZ is a labour market data and economic consulting company. We span out of the University of Idaho over 2 decades ago, and we now work with clients across the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia. And what we aim to do is connect individuals, the education sector, and employers by way of a common language that's relevant to all three. So that being the language of skills, really. And when we use skills as we're using it as a catch-all term for the data that we capture about knowledge, attributes, and behaviors. And by way as well of a common geography between these different stakeholders. So their regional economy, which can be described with labour market data that's relevant to each of these stakeholders. So Debbie, if we stay on that slide, please. So to really shine a light on the labour market in all its aspects, we bring together structural economic data drawn from official government data sets, which are really excellent for helping us understand the shape and makeup of local economies, and big data gleaned from tens of millions of online job postings and worker profiles. The big data is where those critical skills insights are captured, and to make that possible, we've developed an open source skills language, MC Skills. Now, in the UK, we serve our data to HE and FE institutions, local enterprise partnerships, local authorities, central government, staffing companies, and large corporates. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea about what we are and what we do and why. In HE, if we move to the next slide, Debbie, the universities we work with all have a slightly different focus with our data. Typically, we see it being used in market insight teams who are looking to future-proof program portfolios against changing labour markets. We see our data being used to engage academics, by employability teams, by module leaders to tailor their case study choices, by student recruiters, careers advisors to engage potential and existing students with labour market insights. Many universities in England use the data to engage effectively with their LEPs, their local enterprise partnerships. One key area, of course, though, is employer engagement and higher and degree apprenticeships. And how that data can be used is what this session is about, what we're talking about today. So let's move to the next slide. Wait for that to come up. There we go. So to the question, how can you assess and identify potential demand for degree apprenticeships in your region? After all, the standard may suit your capabilities as an institution. It may spark student interest if it's in a sexy new area or a traditionally popular field, but does your local economy actually support jobs in those areas? So let's start with the process, and we can see that here on this slide. So the first thing that we need to do is work out how we're going to align these two things, your apprenticeship and its standard on the one side and the labour market on the other, and which bits of the labour market. And so to do that, you need to agree some definitions. And so we'll look, first of all, at how you may determine what you will be doing in terms of defining what you're looking at in the labour market and where you're looking at it. Secondly, once you've identified what you're looking at, you then need to quantify it. You need to start counting. It's all about the numbers. So looking at numbers of people employed in certain types of jobs, looking at recruitment activity and identifying trends. Then once you've got the numbers, you need to think about context. So where are those jobs in terms of industries? In a bit more detail, what types of jobs are they? So we can get so much detail from looking at the job numbers and the structural data, but actually we can go into more detail about those jobs themselves. And then that takes us to the next level of granularity, which is skills. So what can we find out about the knowledge, attributes, behaviors that in apprenticeship terms, the KSBs, knowledge, skills, behaviors that employers are looking for. And then the final part of this process is looking at the who. So which are the companies which are actively hiring for these relevant types of roles in relevant careers in the relevant geographies. So let's move to step one of the process, definitions. So to understand the link between an apprenticeship standard and the labour market, we have to think about how the labour market in a regional economy is described in the data. And the answer to that is by using the standard occupational classifications, or SOCs, or SOC codes. The most granular of those being the 4-digit SOCs, as used by the Office for National Statistics, the ONS. So here you can see a couple of examples where we've taken a standard, we've looked at the job outcomes described in that standard, and then we've mapped those to the appropriate SOC codes. Now, the Creative Digital Design Professional standard on the right was a much more straightforward mapping than the AI Data Specialist standard on the left. And that's because in the SOC 2010 definitions that we're using, and we will be moving to SOC 2020 once enough data is actually being reported in SOC 2020, but in these, there aren't any dedicated data classifications. So that being the case with that AI standard, in that mapping, we've included a not elsewhere classified, an NEC SOC 2139, which in other mappings we might try to avoid because it can be a bit of a catch-all, but in this instance we need that, and it's appropriate to capture that relevant data. Well, how do you go about doing that kind of mapping? And Debbie, if we could just pop to the next slide. Thank you. So some hints how you might approach it. So if you're working on the mappings yourselves, if you're an analyst user, an MZ analyst user, there are inbuilt mappings to many of the standards, and you can find those in the occupation groups, the template groups, and you can load those up in any report with an occupation filter by clicking on the groups link next to the occupation search box. And you can see an example of one of those mappings in that screenshot at the top there. If you're not an analyst user, or you are, but it's a newly released standard that we haven't mapped yet, then what you can do is take the job title outcomes described in the standard, then enter them into this really handy SOC lookup tool that the ONS have put online. And if the ONS state that so what you basically put in your job title, it will do an intelligent search and then give you a list of 4-digit SOC code outputs. And if the ONS state that a particular SOC code is where they capture the data on a particular job title, then you can be pretty confident you've mapped it correctly. So that's a really useful tool for everyone there. And of course, we'll be sharing the slides and the links and an email with those as well afterwards. So don't worry if you're trying to hastily write down that that address. So let's move to the next slide. You will also need to define your region. So we talked in the definitions bit of the process about understanding which jobs we're going to be looking at, but we also need to look at the geography. And the reason for that is every regional economy is different, and national aggregates aren't really helpful when you're looking to focus your efforts closer to home. Now, you may say you're interested in looking nationally, and if that's the case, you'll still need to dig down into the location data to identify where those opportunities are and the hotspots, because national level data may show some high numbers in aggregate, but they won't tell you where the concentrations are, and they won't also show you where the holes are. And if there are big holes, then you could be spending a lot of effort in places where you're not going to get a return for that. MZ reports 4-digit SOC data for every local authority in the country. So that means if you're using Analyst, you can create and save a customized geography built up from local authorities. And on the slide, you can see how you might use one of our mapping tools in the system to help with that. In England, we often report data using LEP regions, as they're quite useful, coherent economic areas of a local enough scale that are relevant to a range of stakeholders. And again, in Analyst, you can create those and save them in the system, as you can see with the Enterprise M3 region there captured in Analyst on the right of your screen. If you're not in England, then of course you can create your own grouping. So for example, the Forth Valley in Scotland is one that a number of universities use north of the border, for example, although they do tend to differ in their definitions of the makeup of the Forth Valley sometimes. So now we've got our SOC codes and we've decided on the question of place. Next, we can start looking at the numbers and that counting. So if you go back a slide, Debbie, just skip, thank you. So by capturing data about the occupations we've mapped in the region that's relevant to us, we're able to understand potential for the standards we're investigating, i.e. really how significant are job numbers in those relevant occupations. We're not measuring an existing demand for apprentices, but we're counting how many jobs in the area are in relevant or in as closely adjacent fields as the data allows us to see, and whether there has been growth in those jobs over time. Now, there may be a lot of teachers employed and there may be high growth rates in the teaching profession, but as we know, the teaching standard hasn't been hugely popular. So of course there are other factors outside of the labour market analysis that can impact potential. Funding is another one of those. What we're looking at here are insights into the labour market potential, but you will need to bring those other factors into your full analysis, as you should also do with labour market data when considering those other factors in the round. Here, so on this slide, you can see a screenshot from the occupation table in Analyst, where we're just looking at those occupations mapped to the AI data specialist standard. Being based here in Basingstoke, I've chosen to define my region of interest as the Enterprise M3 LEP region. I've also selected a time frame of 2015 to 2020 to get a sense of the direction of travel in terms of growth. For each occupation, and with totals on the bottom row, we can see how many jobs exist. Remember, this is structural economic data based on ONS surveys. So these are actual job numbers rather than data from big data from job postings. And that's an important distinction, and I'll come back to that later. While there's growth here, the rates aren't high, but it's always useful to look at openings as well, because you can see the average annual openings column there. And that's important because openings represent job growth plus churn. And that's that replenishment count as people retire or move on. We can also see some earnings data here and the median highest levels of education in each of these occupations. So there is other aspects of analysis that you can bring into this as well beyond just counting the jobs. So we move to the next slide, please. So I mentioned big data, and while it's useful, while it's less useful for understanding the shape of the economy and counting jobs, it is useful for understanding recruitment activity and shorter term trends. So MZ captures a huge amount, a really huge amount of job posting data. I think we've got in the region of 47 million job postings for the UK, unique job postings at the moment. And all of that can be filtered by the same occupation lens that we used for the structural LMI, so those 4-digit SOC codes, as well as for geography. So we can apply those definitions that we decided on. So here what we can see is job posting activity for those same occupations we've mapped to the AI data specialist standard, and the long-term trends are shown in the graph. And you know, it's quite stark here how much demand seems to have grown in the second half of 2020, despite or perhaps because of the impacts of COVID-19. If we wanted to, we could explore the individual postings to see what might be driving that. Maybe demands of remote working, or the need for more data and data experts, perhaps as COVID, you know, well, what we've seen with COVID, of course, is that in many instances it's been an accelerator of existing trends in the labour market, and this may be an instance of that, perhaps. Debbie, if we just pop to the next slide. So as well as counting the numbers and looking at hiring trends, understanding the context of the jobs is also important. MZ has built staffing patterns into Analyst, which means you can see which industries employ which occupations and to what extent in terms of job numbers in any given region. As with the occupations and SOC codes, we capture industry data using the government's 4-digit SIC codes, or standard industrial classifications of economic activities. So here we can see the job numbers by industries at the 1-digit SIC level, so very general indicators of the sectors that are employing people in the types of roles we've been looking at. But if we now look at the next slide, Debbie, yeah, great. We can see the context with more granularity at the 4-digit level. So in education, of course, context is really, really important. And you know, this kind of data is often used not only in apprenticeships, but elsewhere as well, by academic and employability teams to add relevant flavors to their teaching. So ensuring the relevance of case studies to the industries that students are going to be potentially working in, for example. In terms of degree apprenticeships, it really helps to see where the relevant jobs are and suggests the nature of those jobs within those occupations. If we just move to the next one, please. Great. So, of course, the SOC codes have their limitations. They only take us so far. So we can dig into the big data to see what the job titles are that we're picking up within those SOC codes, and the trends for those, and what the trends for those are, and how much competition there is in the area between employers for those types of roles. So this table is showing job posting data for 2020 for those occupations that we map to the AI data specialist role in the Enterprise M3 LEP region as before, and we can see the bulk of demand in those top 3 job titles. And this is useful as it shows demand in terms of recruitment activity, and it's easier to see relevance between a standard and a job title than an occupation. But on the other hand, remember, these are not job counts. It's very possible for a region to employ a lot of people in an occupation and for there to be flat growth and not very much churn, in which case those jobs aren't going to be well represented in job postings because there's no need to be doing lots of hiring. So using both the structural occupational data as well as the job postings data is really important. Next slide, please. And then as we dig further, we can see the skills which employers are seeking when they advertise roles in the mapped occupations. And here, using the same parameters again, we can surface the top technical skills coming through. We could do the same with soft skills or and some professional certifications as well. But here we're looking at those hard skills or technical skills. And this is really useful, not only from a pedagogical perspective, of course, but also for employer engagement, because being able to talk to employers about the skills they need in the language they use and being able to demonstrate an intimate knowledge of the real world demand makes a big difference to the kinds of conversations you can have with an HR director. And exploring the skills data is also another way, a very granular way to investigate how a standard aligns to the labour market. Is there actual demand for the skills being developed by the standard in your region? Next slide, please. So, of course, everyone working in apprenticeships wants to know about the companies. Which companies do they need to be talking to? And that's because to be able to action any of this insight, you do need to know who to be talking to, and that means knowing the companies which are hiring people in those relevant occupations. So here we can see some of the top companies hiring in 2020 in the Enterprise M3 region for these data specialist roles, and clearly some big names and opportunities here. This data comes from job postings, so it doesn't necessarily mean they're the largest employers of those roles, but given some of the names here, perhaps they are. But it does show that they've been active in the market and that there are conversations to be had. So next slide, please. So if you've found this approach to understanding labour market data useful to assess the potential for a degree apprenticeship standard in your region, then I'm very pleased to announce that we do have some new free reports to share. Obviously, we've only recently launched our local regional economic outlook reports, which if you haven't already got, you can go to our website and there'll be a pop-up that comes up so you can get those as well. And I'll make sure there's a link in the email we send out for those. But these are a bit more tailored. And what we've done here is we've generated basically the key data you've seen in this webinar for the AI data specialist standard and put them into reports which are available at English region level or at home nation level, England, Scotland, Wales, etc., Northern Ireland. So you can request one of those and view we have a UK level report as well, and that's available at the web address on the slide, and again we'll send out the links. All of the data we've looked at here is available in the Analyst, our labour market data research tool. So of course do get in touch if you'd like to be able to use that yourself. And it may be your institution has access but you don't, so we can put you in touch with the people to speak to internally if that's the case. But if you do have access but you're maybe not sure how to produce any of the tables or reports we've been looking at, do drop me a note. You know, ongoing training support, it's all included in your subscription. I'm here and I'm really delighted to help you. So do get in touch if you want to dig down into any of this in more depth. Also, if you would like the equivalent reports for other standards, our consulting team can also do that for you for a fee, of course. And you can put a query through via this page on our website, or of course get in touch with me directly. But that's something as well that we can do for you, and at scale as well, if you're looking at a number of standards. So there's one final thing I wanted to mention, which is skill sync. So I mentioned exploring standards at a skill level, using there is a way to do this with one of our new tools, which is called Skill Sync. And basically what you can do is copy and paste the text of a standard into the tool, and it will pick out those skills terms that we see in the labor market using the MC skills language. And there's a correlation between well, what it then does makes a correlation between the skills that are described in the standard and the skills we see employers talking about in the labor market. And through that correlation, that association, what we're able to see is where that aligns to job titles. So that grouping of skills, which job titles do they reflect in labor market data? So it's another interesting tool. There's a link there for you as well. So that pretty much brings me to the end of what I was planning to say, and thank you for listening, and I really do hope it was interesting. But are there any questions? Very happy to attempt to answer questions.
Let's have a quick look. I think we have. Says Richard, do you have any data on upskilling within employers that fits with this piece?
So that's an interesting question. So if you're looking at upskilling, what you need with upskilling is to know the people that you're upskilling. So we work with companies who will give us their employer profiles, and we are then able to see what skills they have. And then, so for example, I was talking with an HR director not too long ago, and making the point that they need to basically that all their job titles, their job descriptions change every 3 years or so, and what they don't want to do is rehire everyone or just completely change their workforce every 3 years. That's obviously not sustainable. So what they're doing is auditing the skill base that they have within their workforce, and they use the MC skills language to do that. And then what we're able to do is see if there's a new area that they need to fill, which staff will be closest to it. And a good example of that would be cybersecurity. So suddenly there's a lot of demand over the past few years for cybersecurity professionals, and that demand needs to be filled sooner than people coming through very new degree programs in it. Particularly those people won't necessarily have a lot of work experience either. So how do you get experienced professionals who specialize in cybersecurity when there aren't enough people with that skill set? And we actually did some research in this, and what we found out is that the assumption was that you would go to your IT team and upskill those people. And actually what we saw was it wasn't the IT team, it was the finance team that you needed to go to, and where there was the closest alignment of skills. So that is there. In analysts, we have ONET data. So ONET data, the ONET is an American data set which has data on skills, knowledge behind every occupation. And the federal government spends billions on it. It's a hugely big investment for them. And so what we've done, as that's not replicated here, what we've done is map that across to UK occupations. And so in Analyst, what you can do is see how compatible one occupation is with another. How close are they in terms of the skills that make up that type of job? And so yes, there is a way to do that in the data and in Analyst as well. So you can see, okay, which occupations are closest and what needs to be happening. With job postings data, you don't advertise a job to say, well, you may do, I suppose, but you could do keyword search and say we want to upskill for those that are maybe willing to retrain people. Then you could search for job postings which are offering to retrain people, and you can cut the data in that way. So there are different ways you can go about it. It really depends what you're trying to achieve, but I hope that helps.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. That'll be all the questions.
Great. Well, thank you all very, very much. We will get an email with all the links and a copy of the slides across to all of you, as well as a link to the recording. If you do make a request for the local reports, they're likely to arrive with you next week rather than today. So just be aware. And look forward to talking with you more, and again, do connect with me if you're interested to talk about any of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.